Hi, Peter Charles here, Hooked Fly Fishing. And today let's look at a very typical casting problem that a lot of people have, and I had it when I first started out as well. It's very, very common. It's called creeping. And what that really means is we make our back cast, and that part could be okay, or it could be screwed up. Either way, it doesn't matter. And we get the rod back here somewhere, and then before we make our forward stroke, our rod creeps forward. So I'll turn sideways. So it would pick up, rod goes back, and then we creep to about this position, and this is where we start our forward cast from, about here, rather than back there. And that causes all sorts of problems. In fact, you can't get a good cast off if you creep. So let's look at my model here and discuss just basically what that looks like. So the person makes the back cast, they get a D-loop of whatever configuration, and they begin to creep forward, and the back cast starts to get all loose on them because there's no real energy there. They're just moving the rod. They're not loading the rod. So what happens is the whole D-loop starts falling apart, flopping on the water, and they get to about this space here, and that's where the forward stroke begins. So that's where they start to actually try to cast. And there's tons of slack in the D-loop, and basically they're just muscling it out there and they're flopping the line in front of them. And it all starts with that bad creep. And interestingly, most creeping occurs because they're target fixated. So they're ready to beat the rod into submission in order to get the cast going. Okay, let's look at some examples here. Okay, I get it up, I creep forward, and then I slash. So in slow motion. Okay, this high lift is not a great start. The D-loop just falls under the water. My hands are in front of me, and then here, we'll stop there. You can see my casting position right at that. I haven't really started my forward stroke. The rod is not loaded. It's just sitting there. I've just crept forward with the rod, and in the process, the whole D-loop is unloaded. Look at that, it's just fallen on the water. And that's so typical. When you creep, everything just unloads and the D-loop loses all of its energy and it just drops. And my hands, look, my hands are right out here. You know, they're like this. And that's so typical with creeping, is that's the beginning of the forward stroke, with the rod right out in front of you in that fashion. And then you just, there's no load there at all. So your only choice is to smash it in order to try and get a cast off. Okay, I'm sorry, Carly Simons, that was a bad pun, but there's this anticipation thing that goes on with creeping. You're there, and you know you're going to have to smash it because you don't have a D-loop, you don't have a load, nothing's working. You know you're going to have to smash it, so you creep forward in the anticipation of just, all right? So it is really about that anticipation of trying to get it going, and we end up with something like resembles chopping wood. You see how I just chopped the wood? I'm just going to rock backwards and forwards here to show you a second motion, which is part of the anticipation. I call it the giddy up motion, or the wind up. And so people get back here, and they know they're going to have to smash it, so they go, and so the rod goes up, and it dumps the D-loop into the water. All the load goes off the rod. It's a different form of creeping, but it's the same problem. It's an extra motion that you don't need. So you got the one that creeps forward and the one that winds up, but it has the same net effect. Takes the D-load completely, the energy out of the D-loop completely, takes the load off the rod completely. You're not going anywhere. So this must have been a big log because, man, do I ever whack this. There we go. D-loop falls on the water. Oh, big wind up. And wham. And big rip. So here's basically what's going on here. And as I said right at the very beginning is that target fixation problem. It's like, oh my Lord, if I don't keep watching it, it'll run away. And because that target fixation is also a tendency to bend over, it just makes it worse. So what can we do about it? Well, as soon as you start watching the anchor, you're back here. It's tougher to creep. It's not impossible, you can do it. But when your rod is back here and your shoulders are turned, it's a lot tougher to creep because you have to unwind the body. And so you're back here as having watched the anchor, and then you come forward. That helps right off the bat, helps a whole bunch of things, and creeping is one of them. So as soon as you start using your body more than your arms, there's less tendency to creep. And when you're using your body, your hands are back here. And as I said, it's harder to creep with your arms back here. It's easy to creep when your arms are here. So let's make it more difficult to creep simply by moving your shoulders back, turning your shoulders, get your arms back. Just makes it much harder to creep. And once you've done that, you get rid of the wood chop. Because the wood chop occurs when the rod is pretty well vertical in front of the caster like this. And then you have no choice but to wood chop because it's not going anywhere. And people muscle the crap out of it simply because this is where their actual forward stroke starts from, in this position. So if you're having trouble wood chopping and you can't seem to get any load on the rod and you're working your butt off, have somebody take your phone, make a video from the side, and I'm sure you'll see your starting position is here for your forward stroke, or maybe even out here. It gets that ridiculous sometimes. I've always said this to my students, the less you do, the better. So if you're adding a wind-up motion, you're just adding complexity that's not required and you're just messing up your D-loop. So there's no win there. And if you're having all sorts of these kinds of problems, watching the rod tip gives you clues as to what's happening. So if I go back and watch my rod tip, I won't creep. Because I'll see where my rod tip is. To creep, I have to turn my head, and all of a sudden I've got a clue. I can see what's going on. I'm creeping. So often, one of the diagnostics you can use is to watch your rod tip. But the basic the basic cure is watching your anchor. If you watch your anchor and get that body turning, you're not going to creep very often. Most of the time, it's just not going to happen. And it's that target fixation that starts all the problems. Because you're sitting there, eyes glued on the target because the thing might escape if you don't continue watching it. And you make that high lift, which also tends to go together. You make that high lift, and then you creep, and then you thrash. Stop watching the target. Watch your anchor instead. Cures a lot of these problems. So, don't be a creep, okay? And you'll have a lot better cast. Cheers.